education system globally and how it can respond to climate change and the resilience of the global education system. So I would love to welcome to the stage and hand over to Dame Angela McLean, who is our Government Chief Scientific Advisor, to chair the panel.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here. So it's my great pleasure, first of all, to thank the International Rescue Committee for organising this event on our behalf. Can you hear what I'm saying? You look very worried. A bit closer? Very good, thank you. Well, when I was reading my brief for this meeting, I was really quite shocked to read about how much education children lose through disasters, basically. So if you're a child in a high-income country, you can expect to lose on average 2.4 days each year to climate issues. But if you're in a low-income country, you can expect to lose 18 days. So that is a huge gap. Of course, in Jamaica right now, there are 160,000 children affected by schools being partly or totally demolished, and of course by the wider devastation in their communities. Education is of course also a key enabler of climate adaptation. Resilient education systems underpin every aspect of sustainable development. So I'm really delighted to be here to chair, but also to learn from our speakers, because this is a subject that, although it's dear to my heart, like I think for all of us who've been educated ourselves or have been parents of people who are getting educated, nevertheless, this is not a subject about which I am very well informed. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our three speakers for this afternoon's session. So first of all, if I could welcome to the stage Raquel Tejera, who is the Secretary of State for Education, Culture and Sport, and also a professor at the Federal University of Goiás. Our second speaker is Eliska Gooch, who's a youth sustainability champion for the UK Department for Education. So Eliska is currently studying for a Masters in Environmental Science at the University of Nottingham. And then our third speaker, Pala Bregni, is a climate change advisor at Save the Children International, who works in Nepal and in Bhutan. Please, would you come join me on the stage? So if I could ask you to give me some scene-setting comments to get us started, would that work for you? Who would like to go? Why don't I ask Eliska? Would you like to go first? Let me ask you, what are the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation on education that you are seeing in your work and context? And do you think these impacts are well recognised beyond the immediate system and sector?
Okay, so personally, I grew up in a coastal community in the UK, and it was a frontline community. So our town regularly witnessed annual flooding and coastal erosion, and this was really difficult because in our classrooms, even though we were taught about climate change in our science subjects and in geography, we weren't talking about the fact that our homes were slowly falling into the sea, and that was a really difficult topic as our education system positioned climate change as a far-off issue, as if it only affected other people, and like it wasn't happening to us right then and there. And for myself and my peers, this created a lot of eco-anxiety as well, as it was just never being discussed in our classrooms. During my time as Youth Sustainability Champion, I've also spoken to my peer, Charlie, from Oxford, and I learned that last year his school was shut down for 3 weeks during the winter, and the school provided no alternative provision for education whatsoever. I've also heard from Hannah in Manchester, which is in northern England, that one of the school grounds near her is deliberately flooded every single year to prevent the water going to other areas and other infrastructure in the city. And again, no alternative provision for education was provided. Education is access to knowledge, and it is a privilege to receive. Extreme weather is not only affecting the classrooms, but also the transport to school, exam performance, and comfort, as we've also experienced here in our time at COP. When there isn't air conditioning, it's more difficult to listen and focus. And it's not just the schools that need to be made future-proof. We need education to empower and install resilience in us. And we need to redraw the lines of what receiving education and what a classroom looks like to ensure that everyone has equal access and opportunity to education. The Department for Education estimates that extreme heat events which leads to school closures and generally too hot learning environments could result in 11 days of lost learning for pupils in the UK every year by 2050, and that would be nearly 20 days by 2100 at the current rates of warming. And that isn't to mention the risk of flooding and water scarcity and all of the other impacts that climate change is happening on us. I think it's also really important to stand with solidarity with students and young people and everyone globally who's had their education systems impacted and disrupted due to climate change. For example, in Pakistan, in 2022, the flooding destroyed over 20,000 schools, which took 2 million children out of education for months on end. There needs to be a recognition, or that there is a growing recognition where climate change is embedded into the climate solution by the Department for Education in the 2022 strategy. However, I think education is often seen as a sector to be protected through school infrastructure rather than a driver of resilience and adaptation. There's also a lack of recognition in the UK across sectors outside of education of the impact that climate change and degradation can have on climate education. The challenge is ensuring that education is at the table in every climate and adaptation conversation, not just in youth or curriculum spaces. Education systems are both impacted by climate change and a key to the solution. We must strengthen them to become safe and sustainable and empowering climate resilience.
Good afternoon, everyone. Although I don't like the subject, it's a pleasure to be here and sharing with you some of our difficult moments and some of the solutions we are giving to the problems. I'm not sure if everyone knows, but in Brazil, Rio Grande do Sul was the state most deeply affected by extreme climate events. Between 2023 and 2025, we had at least 15 very severe climate events, ranging from droughts to floods, different kinds of floods, flash floods, overflow, all sorts of floods, and extreme heat. So we had almost 2,000 schools deeply affected. And of course, the first impact is in the infrastructure of the schools. 813 of them were completely destroyed. And of course, if the infrastructure is destroyed, the learning impact is obvious. We had schools that remained closed from 7 to 70 days. So when a school is closed for 70 days, the impact is tremendous on learning and social, emotional, and mental health. So we've been registering cases of violence in the schools, extreme anxiety, depression, harm, suicide. So we decided that we cannot understand climate extreme as one event. We have to have a permanent policy for living with that. Luckily, the people from Rio Grande do Sul are probably the ones who love most their country, their territory. So the eagerness to learn how to adapt and live within those conditions is the big force behind all the things. And we also learned that beyond the system, the education system, it was not completely recognized as a problem. We have a very severe gap in budgetary recognition. If you take Brazil, 93% of the budget for climate and environmental procedures are located in the Ministry of Environmental and Climate Change, 99.93. And then we had 0.005% in health, 0.002% in science and technology, and 0 in the Ministry of Education. There is the name of environmental education in the Ministry of Education, but there's no budget allocated to it. So when you decide to overcome the analysis of the problem as event and treat it as a permanent policy, we do face a very serious financing problem. This is a huge challenge because infrastructure needs adaptation that costs money. Emotional problems require special treatment. We decided to have a policy called School Resilient Policy. And our school resiliency faces 3 aspects: infrastructure, curriculum change. We have included climatic information in all series, in all areas of education. And we also included social emotional learning. So climate information, social emotional learning have to be part of the permanent curriculum that is given in our schools. And we also had to create a center of psychological support with psychologists and social assistants, which we did not have, and also created an evidence center, a center for evidence-based education to work with data, with evidence, and BIs that help us follow what is happening in the process. So we've been working on this for 2 years. We now are working with our contingency plans for every school that requires teachers training, community involvement, school involvement. So we are in the process of making this a reality in every school of Rio Grande do Sul.
Raquel, thank you. Thank you so much for those introductory remarks about what you're seeing. However, may I turn to you with the same... You can't hear me, can you? They can hear us, but you can't hear me. So I'm turning to you with the same question, namely, what are you seeing in your work and in your practice about the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation on education?
Thank you so much. Hearing to other two people as well, like it's kind of same. Like I would like to start with some example as Save the Children have recently published one research report called "Born in the Climate Crisis." That report shows that every children living this time, like uh, expected to expected to have the extreme weather event every year, at least one event every year. And same report also revealed that uh, children born in 2020 have more chance, like 7 times more chance of facing extreme event again if they relate with their grandparents. So this is the reality we are living in. And then climate crisis is not kind of the distance threat for the children living everywhere. So we can easily connect the impact of the crisis to the children and their school as well in this context. If I talk about the Nepal, as I am from there, like the system is kind of same there as well. If mainly like school infrastructures located in the disaster-prone zone, for example, floodplain, riverbank, and even the area where most probably like landslide goes. Like the land they used to construct the school buildings are the like government land, and then those lands selected are not saved from the disasters. So that is the context there as well. And every year, if I compare to my childhood, like I rarely used to face those disasters like flood and landslide. I rarely faced at that my childhood. But after like 2015, I would say, before 10 years, every year we have been facing such type of the disasters, resulting the closure of the schools, discontinuing the education of the children. So that is the main case we have been facing. And apart of apart from that, like heat wave has been increasing in Tarai region of the Nepal. That has been causing like extended closure time of the school again. That is the like if you look at the recent data of the 2014, we had around 10 days school closure only because of the heat wave in different part of the country. So that is the one context, and that has been resulting in school dropout and learning loss as well. Like once families has loss in the crop, they like they have an impact on the livelihood. They rarely prioritize their children's education as first priority. So they force their children to go to the unsafe work, even like any kind of the work as well. So there is again other issues added on, like child labor associated with that, and then also they have been facing the psychosocial issues and like mental issues as well at the same time. So these are some of the cases we have been facing. If you look at the data, in Nepal we have around 34,000 schools. Like out of those schools, as I said before, like around 40% schools are located in the disaster-prone area. So we can imagine how we have been impacted every year's disasters. And then, despite of these facts, in terms of the recognition of the disaster in the education system, it is not well recognized, I would say, by different stakeholders, even though there is multiple kind of the effort done by the education sector, Ministry of Education, like they have their own school safety plan, they have own green school development plan as well, and also like DRR is integrated as a part of the school improvement plan in every school. But there is a problem when we goes to the climate policies, policies and other priorities like NDCs and National Adaptation Plan. There is clear disconnect we can see. education sector, if like we want to have some access on the finance, like we cannot have, like we have some eligibility gap for that, because we do not, like, education is not mentioned properly in the NDCs. And then there is one document called National Priority Program developed by the Ministry of Finance that is like mainly based on the NDCs and the NAP. Those NDCs and NAP, since they have not reflected education as the prior issues, it not kind of like GCF and other kind of the fund do not prioritize education sector. I mean, they do not give it as eligible candidate to give the finance to this sector. So that is the issues we have been facing on. And in this context from last year, like we tried to kind of connect Ministry of Education with the focal ministry on the climate, who is responsible to develop the nationally determined contribution and national adaptation plan as well. So at that time, we were somehow now able to integrate education as priority issues in the climate change and NDCs as well. So we advocated with the Ministry of Forest and Environment to include that, showing those impacts data, and then making them realize that if like we do not include those issues in the NDCs, government, even country have less chance of accessing those finance in coming years. So that is the main like kind of the idea we delivered with the Ministry of Forest and Environment. And then now like we have some kind of the integration there. Still we have a gap. Like for example, the document developed by the Ministry of Finance that is submitted to UNFCCC has not like been updated yet. That is one of the things we need to do again. So in terms of the recognition, I would say there is still policy gap. We are working on that as well, but there is capacity we need to develop within the Ministry of Education and Education sector to be more familiar with this kind of the climate negotiation, GCF, other bilateral funds and other things. For like until now, like it's more dependent on the direct government financing, like in-country financing. From recently developed NDCs, it's around like 55 million USD is like kind of the conditional money we need for education sector, and around 70 million for adaptation. So we are seeing the education sector kind of can contribute not only looking as an angle of the delivering the curriculum-based education, climate change awareness only. We are also seeing this sector as kind of the leader. We can do contribution on adaptation and mitigation as well. So that is the context we have been facing and dealing with. Yeah.
Thank you so much for all three. Aliska, if I could turn to you now, and if we could turn our attention to disaster risk reduction, could you talk to me a little about, to all of our audience, a little bit about disaster risk reduction and climate resilience as you see it from your perspective?
Thank you. So, in my role as Youth Sustainability Champion to the UK Department for Education, part of the work is supporting the national schemes that the Department for Education has created. So this includes the Climate Ambassador Scheme, the National Education Nature Park, and this is discussing with young people how climate change is intersectional as it affects us politically, economically, socially, as well as impacting the earth. And it's empowering young people to lead and challenge their way to a more sustainable future. Part of it is also providing educational resources and focusing on the local impacts and locally led solutions that encompass risk reduction and resilience. Last week we had the publication of the Curriculum Assessment Review, And this was shaped by us young people collaborating with government officials and ministers to include climate education across the whole of the curriculum, not just science subjects and geography. This is a really key part in risk reduction and resilience, as we can actually understand what's happening in our world. The UK Department for Education, Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy for Education in 2022 includes commitments to resilience for schools. This includes sustainable infrastructure and the estates, as well as teaching green skills and leading a green career pathway to prepare young people for a just transition to net zero. I think the role of climate education is also important globally in teaching young people and people of all ages exactly what they are experiencing in terms of climate destruction. I recently heard from Pervez Ali about his community in the mountainous area of North Pakistan. The community was experiencing extreme rainfall, and this caused extreme flooding, making him and his whole community homeless. And they didn't have the education to understand that they were experiencing climate change. Without the education, they first understood that it was an act of God. Pervez independently taught himself climate education after some engagement with the Friday for Futures campaign. Him and his peers then decided to lead a climate education in their community to reshape the experience of climate chaos and flooding, where the second time that they were flooded, they understood that it was an impact of climate change. Education is not just crucial to understand what is happening to our homes, but understand that it is not the fault of the global majority. It is the fault of the global minority, of the billionaires and companies that are just driving the destruction of the world. Thank you.
Raquel, may I turn to you with the same question? How do you approach disaster risk reduction and climate resilience in your education work?
After our experience of especially 2024, that was the most dramatic. After that, we decided that we had to have a strategic view on the problem. It's not an event that's exceptional. We had to make it structural part of our planning. And so this strategic vision used the Resilient School as our point of beginning. We need a new system, completely different in the curriculum, in the infrastructure. So you use the framework of school resilience as our strategic vision. But in order to develop this, we had to be aligned with the international framework. So we went after that. We are completely aligned, for instance, with the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience in the education sector. We try to follow the pillars put there of safe learning facilities, school disaster management. We are working together. We're aligned with UNESCO, UNICEF, and also with Brazilian partners in the third sector, like Instituto Unibanco, Instituto Alana. So we went after partners who could help us and teach us how to do. But we also tried to find partners in the government. Education was sort of isolated. Now we are part of the Council of Civil Defense. This is as early as December of 2024, and was sort of result of my pushing and opening spaces. So we are part of that council now. We are occupying places we did not occupy before, but this is very important. We are searching, and we found many partners for building construction. Actually, one of our schools that will be symbol of the reconstruction was done in partnership with an architect office in São Paulo. It was just, it's going to receive an international prize in Venice next week. So we're finding excellent partners for our work, but still the biggest gap is in the financing resources. We have to work more on that. And actually at the moment, what we need most is help in finding new resources and opening spaces. It's easy to open some spaces in certain areas, but finance is more complicated. So we need many strong forces to show that education it should be the center of decisions on climate events. School is a privileged space for changing habits, for forming new ways of looking at the world, at nature, on how you spend and where you should control. I mean, school is by excellence that place, but the world doesn't know about it and still. So we do have to have a big voice showing how we change. If you take Brazil, for instance, we have 180,000 public schools. So it is a place where you really can change things. And so part of our strategic planning, in addition to all global partnerships and all that, we have a very peculiar, we decided to follow a sentence that was constructed collectively, referring to 2024, a year to never forget, a future to always remember. Because based on what we suffered in 2024, we have to remember that we have a future to build. So we're investing all we can in our youth, in our students. We created a council of student participation. They're elected by their schools, their leaders, their climatic leaders. 9 of them are arriving here for COP, and they're going to read a letter of the students from Rio Grande do Sul for climate. So we are really invested in the future, because I believe in education, I believe in science, I believe in youth, and I believe in the future. So my work sort of follows that guidelines, and that's in the direction we're working.
Raquel, thank you. And third, please, Palab, the same question for you, which was how do you approach disaster risk reduction and climate resilience in your education work?
Thank you. Disaster risk reduction and climate resilience is at the center of our education work because, as I said earlier as well, we have been facing multiple disasters. So our approach is kind of addressing those issues through, I would say, multi-layered approach. One is strengthening school system. And second, we have been doing community awareness or community capacity building as well. And third one is kind of the supporting supporting the education system through policy and influencing and on finance again. So these are the 3 approaches we have been working on. For that support, we have some of the program like Climate Smart system initiative that exactly support the Ministry of Education to be more competent on the addressing the learning continuity issues, and then again developing the green school in the disaster-prone area. Those are the support we have been providing to the Ministry of Education in Nepal. And then on strengthening education system again, strengthening education system again, we have one approach called green school approach. Maybe like other countries has also been following similar approach. This green school approach is not only address the disaster risk reduction in the school, this also looks at the angle from the making learning environment better through utilizing like energy efficient appliances in the school, making school more greenery so that learning environment could be kind of the environment friendly as well. And we prioritize to use the carbon friendly construction materials over there, and also at the same time school infrastructures, school periphery are supported through this disaster risk reduction appropriate model. And then like in every school, I said earlier as well, it's kind of the mandatory over there to integrate the disaster risk reduction in their school improvement plan. So schools are capacitated on disaster risk management plan, so that it is included in the school improvement plan as well. And also like we support to do the school-based DRR programming in the different schools through Ministry of Education again. And then we do the community empowerments. Basically, we like mobilize the youths and children from the schools through eco club or child club. Like we capacitate them on the climate issues in the climate issues in the localities they have been facing. We make them capable of discussing on their own about their issues, and then in some cases like we promote the solutions prepared by themselves as well. So these are some of the idea we have been practicing over there. And then in policy and influencing again, like I earlier gave the example of NDCs and the NAP as well. So we basically develop the capacity of the Ministry of Education in the developing some project idea to submit to the climate funds such as GCF, Adaptation Fund and other as well. And then we make education sector more eligible towards the climate fund, like decreasing that gap of the eligibility through policy influencing, again integrating disaster risk issues and climate issues in the NDCs and NAP programming. So these are some of the appropriate kind of the interventions support we are doing in DRR and the climate change. Like in kind of the overall, I would say support approach, we are looking education sector. Again, like I'd like to give one example in NDC again. Like we have integrated just transition as one of the target within the education. You mean like from education system, we want to develop the skilled manpower of the youth and adolescents in the future, so that the transition, energy transition process can be supported through the education system as well. So in the just transition, we have been prioritizing green transition aligning with the DRR need and climate impact needs as well. So these are some practices and then approaches we are doing in the DRR and education.
Thank you all three. So our panelists have been so beautifully brief and to the point that we have plenty of time for questions. So if there are questions in the audience, put your hands up one at a time and I'll come to you.
Wonderful. I will introduce myself. Firstly, thank you all so much for being here on this really warm day. I am Dr. Amy Munro-Fall. I'm the Head of Education and Student Engagement at Cambridge Zero, which is the University of Cambridge's Climate Change Initiative, and it's wonderful to be here with our speakers today. I'm going to take questions. I'd like to take them in groups of 3 to start off with, if that's okay. And so I think there's one over here.
Hi, thank you everyone. That was really interesting and inspiring. I'm Jenny Cooper, I'm from the National Education Union in the UK. We've worked alongside SOS UK on pushing for the curriculum review as well in the UK. And it's great to hear about all the things that you're doing on making schools resilient. So I've been working with the Greening Education Partnership, and we've got meetings this week as well around developing toolkits, and these have been developed in conjunction with educators from trade union representation alongside UNESCO, and we're really hoping that loads of countries will kind of push for this and sign up to it, because these are like really useful documents for ministries and also local governments and councils and even individual schools or companies running privatised schools or anything to use to try and do all that kind of risk assessment process that you're talking about, to try and make sure that education is resilient, but also that people are looked after in terms of their social and emotional and all the rest of it. And my question, I've got two questions really. One is, what can we do to kind of push that, make sure that more people sign up to it, and are actually there doing it, not just signing up in name like people do with things at COP, but actually doing the work. And my other question is to Eliska, who is, you're phenomenal and really inspiring. Thank you for everything you've done. And would you be happy to just meet me very briefly afterwards so that I can hand over to you some climate keys that have been produced by some kids in the UK, younger than you, so to pass on the baton, if you like. And they've got messages for world leaders. And I was thinking that if I presented them to you, you could then give them to some powerful people. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. And was there another question in the audience? Yeah, over here.
Hello, my name is Renan. I'm a coordinator of a project of education for climate change in Amazon. We are teaching young guys here in the region to know about SAFs, that reforestation, geospatial analysis. So it's many things that we can talk. But I would like to know about what the legacy that COP is going in Amazon. What do you think that the measurements that should take at the moment that the COP is right here? So what do you think that the COP is just not the diplomacy? That's something that should be also bring something more concrete, more robust for the education, the climate education in the Amazon region. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to start with that first question. How do we push for action with the Greening Education Partnership and the toolkits that have been being produced, and a specific ask to Eliska? But Raquel, do you want to take that first?
The noise is really bothering. I'm not sure I understood the questions clearly, but I'm going to begin with your question about the COP being in the Amazon. I think what we can learn most about having the COP here is about diversity. Diversity of people, of languages, of cultures. And I visit a school based on nature this morning. It's amazing, the interaction between the students and the teachers and nature. Of course, I don't have a forest in Rio Grande do Sul to have a school similar to that, but it was very inspiring learning some of the experiences we can have over there. And one thing that is very clear to me after all I went through, and the more I get to know other experiences, is that climate changes impacts mostly the vulnerable people, the poor people, the indigenous people, the Negro people. So we have the COP being in Brazil, where you have diversity and where you have huge inequality. I think this COP should inspire us to make this the COP of combating vulnerability, because the events always happen, will continue to happen. They become disaster when they meet, when they encounter vulnerability. So we should leave this COP ready to work to combat vulnerability. That's why funding is so important. Pope Francis asked us to make the COP, the COP of the children. I dare to say that we also should make this COP the COP of education, because that's where the children are. That's where you change the way you live, the way you face the world. So I think the big lesson we can learn from having a COP in the middle of the Amazon is pay attention to inequality, diversity, and face that challenge. Okay?
Brilliant, thank you. Aliska, would you like to add anything to that?
Okay, so I think they are both fantastic questions. I also think that the resources that we're putting out to communities, not only in the UK but globally, is so incredibly important. I think as well they need to be tailored to the age, so young people and future generations growing up are understanding what is happening in their environment and environments globally as well. I think they need to also be locally focused as well. Every area across the world is completely different, and it's absolutely remarkable. But in that sense, it needs to be locally focused information, and for that you consult people who have lived there for hundreds of thousands of years, indigenous peoples. And it's also about understanding that each different community isn't an independent bubble. We're all living together with nature as well. So we need to be working globally as well as specifically, and honing down into our specific areas. Yeah. Not sure what else to add, but I think, yeah, fantastic questions. Very complicated. Yeah.
Brilliant. So a call for this to be the COP of education, and a real reminder of the need for really locally focused but globally relevant resources when we're thinking about climate education. Right, there's an opportunity for more questions. There are more questions in the audience. Yes, can I take this lady over here, and then you, and then you. And if you could say your name and your organisation as you ask your question, and in the interest of time, keep it brief, if you will.
Sure. My name is Angela Kauleni. I'm from Tanzania, Save the Children. And my question goes to Brazil regarding the climate financing gap for the education sector. You mentioned that 99% goes to other sectors, but not education has a very limited budget. So is there any, lessons in terms of your journey to address that gap, in terms of what other countries can learn, and what did you do that we can learn in addressing that gap? Yeah, thank you.
So the question, we'll take the other next two questions, but the question was that in the climate financing gap, education has a very limited target, so what can we do about that?
Can I answer now?
Answer
Oh,
now.
okay. Well, the huge gap in financing, as I showed, is the permanent state. Because we had a very exceptionally big disaster in 2024, we had permission to open extra account of money. That's how we could face the disaster we did. But that was because of that 2024 disaster. It's not the permanent situation. What I'm advocating here is that we have to discuss a permanent fund for that, because we cannot expect huge disaster to open exceptionally extra funding. That's my huge concern and preoccupation.
Brilliant, thank you. And if we could take these two questions and take both of them, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Tracy Wainwright, Unison from the UK. I'd just like to thank you for the fact that you've mentioned that climate change and the impacts of climate change hit the poorest in society, because that hasn't been mentioned before within this context until you've just mentioned it there. And that's where I come into my question, is around, we understand obviously infrastructure where there's been a big climate disaster. What I would like to understand is there any conversations around the children that are living in poverty that have been impacted by a climate disaster where they're unable to get to school? We understand those that have funds are able to continue their education for their children, but for those living in poverty, they can't, and they fall behind. So what's been discussed around having part of the funding to ensure that those children do not fall behind in their education, and we keep them moving forward to be part of society in the future rather than being left?
And the next question down here.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Janaína, and I'm the coordinator of the Global Alliance for Disaster Risk Reduction and Resilience in the Education Sector. My question is for the audience and also for the presenters. We have two challenges in funding. One is domestic, so how Raquel was illustrating the challenging on how the money is allocated at domestic level, and the international level, where we have less than 1% of big multilateral funds like the Green Fund that funds only less than 1% of education. So we are COP, we are the blue zone, where supposed the decisions are made. My question is, where can we be as a group of people who believes education is a key part of it, so we can advocate together? So I think it's more an invitation and a question if you are aware of these spaces where we should be talking about, because I think most of people here are already convinced that this is important, but we need to convince the people who are working right now on the adaptation plans and adaptation funds during COP.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So those two questions, in brief summary, where in the conversation around children is poverty? When disasters happen, those children are falling behind. Where is that conversation? And the second question is, we are all convinced of the value of this. Where can we be as a community so we can advocate for appropriate funding for this together?
In relation to the first question, when I said we have massive learning loss, they're poor children, they don't have conditions at home. Just to give an example, between 2023 and 2024, in the national comprehensive evaluation, the state dropped 18 points in literacy, 80-year-old young children, the biggest loss in the country, which was a direct impact of classes with school closed. So we created a pedagogical way to go out of this. We created a program called Continuous Learning, where we hired 400 more teachers, especially of language and math, to give extra classes support for these poor kids. Because if they don't catch up, they will just abandon school. This is actually one of our big challenge. They abandon. If you consider, for instance, black children in my state, of every 100 kids that enter the first year, 53 will, for every 100 children, 53 will abandon along their way and abandon very early. So we are creating extra classes, but we are also creating all sorts of stimulus, even bonus, premium, and apparently it's working because they're really beginning to work hard again. But it is a challenge, pedagogical and financially, because you need money to have extra teachers, extra classes, extra food, because they get their food in our schools. We give them the uniform, the clothing, the food, so that requires money. That's why I'm so concerned about funding, and that's why I'm so happy to hear what you said, Janaina, because I could not be the author of your provocation, but I wanted to hear that. So I want to hear the answer from the rest of the people.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'd like to hand over to Pala, who might want to come back on the second question a bit.
Thank you so much. Responding on your thought, like, yeah, education system and education sector should be prioritized. Like, we all need to internalize that this should be kind of the one of the sector that really can have an impact on the children and on the future as well. But looking at the negotiations and different platforms, again, we have not seen the people from poor education background on the negotiation. We have not seen. I'm looking at my country's negotiation team. In party, there is no education people. There are the people from Ministry of Health. There are the people from disaster risk reduction. There are the people from like Ministry of the Finance, and even other ministry like Ministry of Children and Women are there. But there is no people from the Ministry of Education. That means level of awareness to be here, to be part of negotiation is not there, I'd say. So that need to be, I'm not sure how to connect. We are trying to do that. Ministry from country level should be aware of that and should come here to negotiate as party. So then only we can make these things happen. Maybe the advocacy, the capacity building support, we need to start from the country level, from the Ministry of Education, even maybe lower than that. And then like here as like the people who wish to be education, to be part of the negotiation and to be part of the, let's say like we have been prioritizing, pushing for GGA, education part of the GGA as well. So let's make it happen together. Let's build the capacity, or let's make the education sector more aware to be here for the negotiation. That's what I would like to say.
Brilliant. Brilliant, thank you. So it strikes me there's a connected set of things here. There's an understanding that education can have a massively growing and catalytic effect on how we address climate justice both in and through education. There's a recognition that schools are key locations for all different types of humanitarian aim, including food security and health. There's an establishment of the fact that when people are experiencing poverty and a disaster happens, that the outcomes, there's really good evidence that the outcomes for that last for up to 20 years, that they are set back for up to 20 years. There's also a connected piece that the level of funding being received by education at present is inadequate, and that there is a need for us to convene and bring together our community to call for greater ambition on education through these negotiation processes. I hope that's a fair summary of what was said. Are there more questions from the room? Yes, this lady over here in the orange. And then after her, this gentleman down here.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the panel. It's been a really wonderful discussion. So thank you very much. I just wanted to respond to the question about how we can influence the negotiations for greater financing. My name's Alice. I'm also from UNICEF Australia. One of the key things is how we can get language into texts. And so with the Global Goal on Adaptation, the negotiations around what the indicator framework will be, one of the key things is, can we get stronger indicators for education, really marking out how countries will be accountable for integrating better education systems that will drive financing flows. So if any of you is speaking with your negotiating teams from your countries, having a close look at the GGA indicator framework is a key way to do that. UNICEF has some suggested text, so if anybody wants, feel free to come and see me afterwards.
Brilliant, thank you. And this gentleman down here.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear? So, yeah. No, thank you very much for what is clearly a very important discussion. I'm Tom from the British Council here in Brazil. And I have a question for the representatives from Rio Grande do Sul and from Nepal about specific focus on teacher capacity to deliver climate education. I just have an indicator of why I feel that's really important. We've just released a piece of research called Next Generation Brazil, looking at youth attitudes to big issues facing them. And one of the questions that we asked was who are the most important and trusted sources of information for young people? And the answer categorically was teachers. 20% more than their own family, 25% more than the media, and 30% more than the social media. So it really feels to me that education systems are houses for really building some consensus around what we need to do about climate action. I'd be really interested to hear your responses.
Wonderful, thank you, Tom. Before you answer, I want to add a little extra flavour. Can you hear? Yeah. I want to add a little bit of something extra to this question. I think one of the challenges that we face currently is also misinformation, and this is where trust in the sources of teachers becomes very important. So in answering Tom's question, I'd be fascinated to hear any additional considerations that you could give around how we address misinformation in education relating to the climate.
I think I'm getting deaf. The noise is really bothering me, but if I understood the question is how do we face the climate education in this context of adversity or not? No. Repeat your question.
My role was specific. Oh, that is much better. My role was specifically about what role you give to teachers and their capacity to deliver climate education.
Very important question. Very important because education really happens in the eye-to-eye of teachers and students in the classroom. This is the most important relation. And the teachers are not prepared for what is happening. So teacher training is the most important aspect. When we, in the work we were doing with the contingency plans, we have guidelines for contingency plans like understanding location of the schools, how vulnerable is it, understanding the building, what are the vulnerabilities in the infrastructure, is there a leak in the roof? I mean, the school is invited to know everything about their space, and the teachers are the guiders for this. So we are doing teacher training with the teachers because they're the leaders of this work. They call the parents, they involve communities, they decide clear roles for each one in the school, safe routes, what to do before the event, during the event, after the event. So that requires a lot of teachers training, but they are very much interested in this. For my surprise, because it's common when you introduce a new topic, there's sort of, oh, one more thing to learn. But this topic specifically really touches their heart. They are anxious to learn more about it, and they are deeply involved in the cause. It's, I'm absolutely sure that they are the most important subjects in the whole process.
Just adding on what she said, like I'm giving you example of teachers training, like how we are going to do. Teacher training was is a part of the regular program there. Right now, like through NDC, we are making a target like there will be the adaptation resource person in school. Like we are adding kind of the additional courses to those teachers to make them more competent on adaptation knowledge, so that like school kind of the disaster preparedness and adaptation planning could deliver better. So that is how like we have been planning for coming years till 2035. So that is one of the plan we have been integrating in the teachers training. And then other thing like to make the education sector more kind of the resourceful with the information, we'll be conducting researches on the learning loss. Actual like how much like we want to kind of quantify the learning loss in the different schools have like impacted by the climate change. So we are expecting to do all of the 753 local municipality to do such kind of the research to make the education system more enrichful with those kind of the information, so that we can utilize those to access the climate finance again. So these are some of the approach we'll be doing in coming years. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'd like to give Aliska a chance to come on this as well.
We all know that teachers are absolutely powerhouses, and since the launch of the curriculum assessment review last week in the UK, one of the key parts is teachers teaching and students learning the importance of critical analysis skills, especially in an era where there is so much information that we could be learning all day, every single day. It is so important that young people have those skills to analyze the resources and the information that they are being told, not only just in the classroom, but outside of it and in our conversations and in the media day to day. And misinformation, I think, is more dangerous than disinformation because there is an element of truth to it, and it's spun slightly differently in the media to what is the fact. So those skills are super important. And as well as mentioned in the review, that climate education is going to be embedded across all different subjects, not just science and geography, and that really gives the opportunity not only to teach young people, but to empower them, and teachers play a really critical role in that, in terms of learning about what they can act on, whether it's in English or maths or creative subjects as well. And it's about empowering teachers not only to also do the climate literacy training, but also understand the role that they can play as educators and how it embeds into the subject that they are so knowledgeable on. So it's something I could talk about for hours, but it's a very multifaceted approach.
Brilliant. Thank you to all of our three speakers. I'm going to hand back over to Angela to wrap up the session.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm going to just very briefly sum up where we got to. We heard from all three of our panelists. Hiya. We heard from all three of our panelists about their observed great impacts on children's education in these three very different environments where they work and that they understand and know so deeply. We heard particularly about not only lost days of education, but measurable. You can't.
Here on that one.
There's something about me and microphones. So we heard from all three of these deeply knowledgeable and very committed panelists about the great impact that climate change is having on education for all of our children, and not just in terms of lost days, but also in terms of measurable deficits in progress of children's education, and crucially, particularly so for the poorest children. We heard about there's really a lack of attention, from what I hear from you, to this extremely important issue for all our futures. And I think Palab made the very important point that there is not enough focus in the way each of our countries write our NDCs and our national adaptation plans to this extremely important issue. When we turn to talk about education and disaster risk reduction, Aliska made this very important point that education is itself an important part of disaster risk reduction. Raquel made this very strong call for strategic vision, particularly in order to have resilient schools. And Palab made the point that schools should not only be resilient, but they should also themselves be environmentally friendly places. And then you in the audience let us have this really, really rich exchange and discussion during which we came, I thought, to these really important points about how we really everybody needs to pay more attention to climate change and education in general, and very particularly to the way it impacts, it greatens inequality, it exaggerates inequality. So we had then this a general discussion I felt came up again and again amongst us about the important role of teachers and education, but also for actual concrete actions that we can take in making sure that there are stronger indicators for education in the texts that are being negotiated here this week and next week. So I'm going to just repeat some of the words that were said here in this panel, because I thought there were some wonderful words said along the lines of, first of all, pay attention to inequality and to diversity, make this the COP for education, and don't stop ignoring this fantastically important aspect of being ready for climate change. So I'd like to thank all three of our panelists, Aliska, Raquel, Palab, and I'd also very much like to thank Amy for chairing the question and answer session so beautifully. I'd really like to thank all of you, actually, the audience, because you've made this a very engaged, proper interaction in the questions and answers. And finally, of course, let me absolutely thank the International Rescue Committee for organising this session. Please join me in thanking